Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 2 Kings, the 24th chapter. And in here we see the mention of Nebuchadnezzar, right? The Babylonians officially coming against Judah and Jerusalem at this point, okay, to eventually take them down. Now, when we read in the previous chapter, right, we had read about Josiah, how he lived and how he died, and how Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt came up and ended up, after the death of Josiah, his son Jehoahaz was set on the throne, though after a few months he was deposed by Pharaoh Necho, and instead Jehoiakim, which was another son of Josiah, was then set on the throne. So it is this same Jehoiakim that is on the throne at this time in 2 Kings 24, and I believe he is the king that Jeremiah also prophesies against. In fact, there's an account in the book of Jeremiah that the letter of Jeremiah is read before him, and then he has them sort of rip it up and burn it and stuff because he wasn't trying to hear that. So he did a great deal of wickedness there too. But this is what leads up to the point where we are in 2 Kings 24. Now, a bit of background history here. I'm just going to open one tab here, and we go into fall of the Assyrian. And I believe I might have covered this already in maybe one of the breakdowns in the book of Daniel, but just to recap here, as we went through the book of 2 Kings, right, 1st and 2nd Kings, more primarily 2nd Kings, we saw at some point that the Assyrians, right, came and besieged the northern kingdom, deported the northern tribe, right, northern kingdom out of their land, and put heathens in the land. And then we switch back to Israel and the things that were going on in Israel, and then now we hear about the Babylonians coming up into power and basically taking down the southern kingdom here. Okay, so just to bridge the gap here, or refresh your memory here in terms of the in between, right, as to what happened. In fact, let me okay, there's some information in here as to what happened. So in a nutshell, the period in between before Nebuchadnezzar comes against us here that we're reading of in 2 Kings 24, you had the Assyrian Empire. They reigned for some time and then they fell, right? They started going down due to a rebellion, right, by Nabopolassar, and an alliance between him, which at that point he had rule over Babylon, and the Medes, okay, because going prior, let's actually read it. Might actually be in here. So let's see. Yeah. All right, so I'll read this a little bit just to give that context. It says here, collapse and fall of the empire. Now, this is the fall of the Assyrian Empire, right? And this is the period in between when you read about in Daniel the 7th chapter, right? There's those different beasts that are mentioned, and those beasts represent the different major empires that were reigning in succession of each other in that vision. So collapse and fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. After Ashurbanipal's death in 631, he was one of the last major kings of the Assyrian Empire. The throne was inherited by his son Ashur-etil-ilani, though some historians have forwarded the idea that Ashur-etil-ilani was a minor upon his ascension. This is unlikely given that he is attested to have had children during his brief reign. Ashur-etil-ilani, despite being his father's legitimate successor, appears to only have been installed against considerable opposition with the aid of the chief eunuch Sin-shumu-lashir. An Assyrian official by the name of Nabu Ritu-usur appears to have attempted to usurp the throne, but his conspiracy was swiftly crushed by Sin-shumu-lashir. Since excavated ruins at Nineveh from around the time of Ashurbanipal's death show evidence of fire damage, the plot might have resulted in violence and unrest within the capital itself. In comparison to his predecessors, Ashur-etil-ilani appears to have been a relatively idle ruler. No records of any military campaigns are known at his palace at Nimrud, and his palace at Nimrud was much smaller than that of previous kings. I'm just going to skim down here a bit and come down here. All right, so it says here, it's just a little bit left. Let's get the context. It says here, it is possible that the government was more or less entirely run by Sin-shumu-lashir throughout his reign. After a reign of only 4 years, Ashur-etil-ilani died in unclear circumstances in 627 and was succeeded by his brother Sin-sharishkun. It has historically frequently been assumed, without any supporting evidence, that Sin-sharishkun fought with Ashur-etil-ilani for the throne. Although the exact circumstances of Ashur-etil, this guy's name, man, his death, Ilani's death are unknown, there is no evidence to suggest Sin-sharishkun gaining the throne through any other means than legitimate inheritance after his brother's sudden death. Cool. All right. Now we want to get to the part where they actually go down. And I think that's mainly here. Yeah. So it says, Sin-sharishkun's ascension did not go unchallenged. Immediately upon his rise to the throne, Sin-shumu-lashir rebelled and attempted to claim the throne for himself. So in a nutshell, there was getting to the end of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, there was a lot of this civil war, court intrigue, back and forth, conspiracies, and all of these, right? Because then the kingdom started to become weaker. Where are we at? Despite the lack of genealogical claim, and as the only eunuch to ever do so in Assyrian history, Sin-shumu-lashir successfully seized several prominent cities in Babylonia, including Nippur and Babylon itself, but was defeated by Sin-sharishkun after 3 months. This victory did little to alleviate Sin-sharishkun's problems. The long-reigning Babylonian vassal king Kandalanu also died in 627 BC. The swift regime changes and internal unrest bolstered Babylonian hopes to shake off Assyrian rule and regain independence, a movement which swiftly proclaimed Nabopolassar, which is the father of Nebuchadnezzar II, probably a member of a prominent political family in Uruk, as its leader. Now, the thing between Babylon and Assyria, right, if you look here, say Mesopotamia, and there's some images on that. So they don't list all the cities, but Babylon, I think, was more south, and you had Assyria, which is more north, and they will constantly go back and forth. We were going back a long time ago, right? They'll constantly go back and forth. When Babylon was in power, they had jurisdiction of the area. When Assyria was in power, they had jurisdiction of the area. Now, so that's why the Babylonians, as we read here, wanted to basically break free of that reign, and in doing so, they proclaimed Nabopolassar as their leader. Some months after Sin-shumu-lashir's defeat, Nabopolassar and his allies captured both Nippur and Babylon. Though the Assyrian response was swift and Nippur was recaptured in October 626, Sin-sharishkun's attempts to retake Babylon and Uruk were unsuccessful. However, in the aftermath, Nabopolassar was formally invested as king of Babylon on November 22nd, 626, restoring Babylonia as an independent kingdom. So now they've been separated from the Assyrians, but that wasn't the end of it. In the years that followed Nabopolassar's coronation, Babylonia became a brutal battleground between Assyrian and Babylonian armies. Though cities often repeatedly changed hands, the Babylonians slowly but surely pushed Shin-Shirishkun's army out of the south. All right, let's skim through here. All right. It says, despite this loss, there was little reason for the Assyrians to suspect that Nabopolassar's consolidation of Babylonia was a significant event and not simply a temporary inconvenience. In previous Babylonian uprisings, the Babylonians had at times gained the upper hand temporarily. More alarming was Nabopolassar's first forays into the Assyrian heartland in 616 BC, which amounted to capturing some border cities and defeating local Assyrian garrisons. So this marked the beginning of the fall of the Assyrian Empire and the rise of the Babylonian Empire, or the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Assyrian heartland had not been invaded for 500 years, and the event illustrated that the situation was dire enough for Shin-Shirishkun's closest ally, Psamtik I of Egypt, to enter the conflict on Assyria's side. And this probably is what ended up leading to, later on down the line, even Pharaoh Necho then going up to Carchemish to defend the Assyrians, because that's what he was going there to do. Psamtik was probably primarily interested in Assyria remaining as a buffer between his own growing empire and the Babylonians and the powers in the east. In May 615, Nabopolassar assaulted Ashur, still the religious and ceremonial center of Assyria, and by now the empire's southernmost remaining city. Let's see. Here we go. Shin-Shirishkun succeeded in defeating Nabopolassar's assault and for a time saving the old city. So this is like a back and forth that they were having, right? It is doubtful that Nabopolassar would ever have achieved a lasting victory without the entrance of the Median Empire into the conflict. Long fragmented into several tribes and often targets of Assyrian military campaigns, the Medes had been united under King Cyaxares in late 615 or 614 BC. Cyaxares and his army entered Assyria and conquered the region around the city of Arapha in preparation for a campaign against Shin-Shirishkun. So basically what ended up happening here is, as you'll see as we go through, the Medes had an interest in coming against the Assyrians because of the previous history of back and forth they had, and so did the Babylonians. So what better way than to unite to take out a common enemy, which is basically what they did over here, right? And that's what led to the union, right? The alliance by marriage between Nabopolassar's son, which was Nebuchadnezzar II, and Cyaxares' daughter, which I believe was Amytis. And basically now there was an alliance there by marriage between these two sides, and then they joined together and basically took down the Assyrian Empire. And I'm not going to read through all the details here. You can do that on your own time. It's a lot of information, but that's the whole gist of how we lead to the Babylonians coming up into power, the Assyrians being taken down, and going back to 2 Kings, why it is that now we're dealing with the Babylonians. How did that transition go about? Now, in addition, if you look up here, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, what you'll notice here is an image like this, which is pretty cool. You can see that around the same time, okay, it was pretty cool until it didn't want to load anymore. All right, so I can't find that exact visual anymore, but that's yep, there we go. Cool. So you see here, there's Babylonia, right? And then there's also Media over here. And around the same time that the Babylonians were ruling, so were the Medes, right? But they weren't at war with each other. They weren't vying for being the ultimate dominant power in the region, because remember, they had an alliance, right? And that alliance allowed them, okay, the Medes ruled over here doing their thing, and the Babylonians ruled over here. And of course, we were subject under the Babylonians here. So that's why you don't really hear too much about the Medes in what they did against us, or them being like a standalone empire in the scriptures, because we weren't concerned with them. We were concerned with the Babylonians. But you do hear about the Medo-Persian Empire. You do hear about the Persians rising up and getting the upper hand over the Medes. But if you didn't understand that at one point the Medes did rule, they did have dominion over here, and you had Persians living in the region, they were just subject onto them. Okay, and then at the appointed time, under Cyrus, the Persians were able to come up into power and then overtake the Median kingdom, turning it into the Achaemenid Empire. So anyway, let's go back into 2 Kings 24. So at this point, and it reads, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, and this is in the days of Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servants 3 years. And he turned and rebelled against him. And when you read in the context here, you'll realize that that is pretty much what Jehoiakim did. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord Yahweh, which he spake by his servants the prophets. Right now, the Lord sent these. This was obviously over a period of time, and it doesn't mean necessarily, right, that on February 13th of whatever day the Lord sent all these at once. Could have, but in a practical sense, it could be that over a duration of time, all these different neighboring nations started coming in against Judah, and so on and so forth. Surely at the commandment of the Lord Yahweh came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord Yahweh would not pardon. See, so regardless of all the things that Josiah did and the reform and all that, the one thing, as it says, the Lord would not pardon was the wickedness that Manasseh did, and therefore that land had to be cleansed. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? And pretty much as it goes, Jehoiakim, he ended up rebelling, which brought or led Nebuchadnezzar to come to Jerusalem, and I think he laid siege to it, but not for long. And Jehoiakim, there's some sources that say he died in that siege. Some say he was taken to Babylon. Long story short, he ended up, his life ended up coming to an end. And after him came, here we are. I believe we are, yeah, here we go, verse 6. So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiakim, his son, reigned in his stead. So you had here, you had Josiah, right? And Josiah had Jehoahaz, right, which he was put on the throne, he was taken out of power. And then following Jehoahaz came Jehoiakim, right, who was the one we're reading about here. He ends up dying, and his son Jehoiakim, which will be the grandson of Josiah, is now put into power here, Jehoiakim, right? Or in other words, Jeconiah. That's another term or name that he is known by. And the king of Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt onto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt. So if we take a look here, or rather here, you can see, well, here it puts it here, but of course the Babylonians ended up extending their territory to capture more of that region and subject Egypt as well. All right. So back in 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 48. Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord Yahweh, according to all that his father had done. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother, and his servants, and his princes, and his officers, and the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And now, when he was taken to Babylon, right, he wasn't put to death, right? It wasn't like, okay, we took him and then slew him. He was actually preserved, because it was through his line that eventually would lead to Yahushua coming on the scene. And therefore, when you actually look up Jeconiah, there is a part in here, released from captivity. It says here, according to 2 Kings 25 and 27 to 30, Jeconiah, which was the one we just read about, who basically gave himself up to Nebuchadnezzar, was released from prison in the 37th year of the exile, in the year that Amel Marduk came to the throne, and given a prestigious position at court. Jeconiah's release in Babylon brings to a close the Book of Kings and the Deuteronomistic history. It says Babylonian records show that Amel Marduk began his reign in October 562 BC. And there's actually some secular history about the rations that were given to Jeconiah, right? Which is alternative source to show you the the validation, right, of the record that we read of here in the scriptures. Now it says here, chapter 1 verses 11 to 12 of the Gospel of Matthew lists Jeconiah in the lineage of Yahushua through Joseph. Okay, so once again, now you see why that the Lord preserved, he had to preserve at least somebody from that royal line from which Yahushua would come through, else he wouldn't be able to be the son of David, right? He wouldn't be able to say he is of the root and the offspring of David, right? So, continuing on here, verse 13, and he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord Yahweh, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold, which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of the Lord Yahweh, as the Lord had said. Now, at this point, this wasn't when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. Okay, this was, you could consider it the first exile, where they ended up taking the royalty, right? Daniel and the 3 holy children and the other children. They ended up taking, as we're about to read, I think Ezekiel was included in here, right? They ended up taking the craftsmen and so on and so forth out of Jerusalem. And then Nebuchadnezzar set up Zedekiah, which was the last king or Judite to reign before Jerusalem was actually destroyed. Okay, so it says here, verse 14, and he carried away all Jerusalem. Not every is just saying the majority of the people and the things in Jerusalem Nebuchadnezzar took. And all the princes and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths, none remained save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land, those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths 8,000, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. So real quick, if you look up here, Zedekiah, all right, it says here, Zedekiah, and then you can see here, his predecessor was Jehoiakim, right? But his father was Josiah. So the 3 brothers, or it might actually have been more, But the ones that were mentioned at least are the sons of Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah or Mattaniah. Okay, and so when Nebuchadnezzar came and took Jehoiakim, the grandson of Josiah, which was the actual heir, right? You could say, took him captive to Babylon, he ended up setting up his uncle, which is what we're reading of here. And changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And likewise, if you look up here, where else have we heard that? Hamutal. 2 Kings 23, and this is, let's see, Zedekiah. Actually, let me look up Josiah. I'm not sure if it mentions upon his or Slakia. No, I did have it right. It should have been Hamutal. Yeah, so I am looking here. So Jehoahaz, as you can see here, I believe this is where his name was mentioned, or her name was mentioned. So Jehoahaz, as it says, was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. So this Hamutal was the wife of Josiah. Okay, and that's why Jehoahaz, which was a son of Josiah, has the same mother as Zedekiah, which is also a son of Josiah. All right. So wrapping up here, verse 19, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord Yahweh, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. So even Zedekiah also did evil. For through the anger of the Lord Yahweh it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, until he had cast them out of his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. And this rebellion is what led to the Babylonians coming against Jerusalem again, and at this time laying siege to Jerusalem and then ultimately destroying it. Now, when we get to the book of Jeremiah, you'll see the other side of this, the more internals of this, which is, what was happening on a more granular level during the reign of Jehoiakim, during the reign of Jehoiakim, during the reign of Zedekiah, and how Jeremiah was, telling them what the words of the Lord were, and ultimately how they should submit to the Babylonians, and yet they didn't, right? You had Zedekiah flip-flop until eventually he said, nope, I'm going to rebel, and then he got cooked. So that brings us to the end of 2 Kings, the 24th chapter. It is a lot of information on the secular side, but that's up to how much time you have and how much you want to invest in knowing about that. But the information is there. All right. So Lord willing, this is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.